Продовжуємо роботу.
We continue our working day in Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Now the floor is given to Colonel Oleksandr Motuzyanyk, Ministry of Defense of Ukraine spokesman, and NATO-related issues. Good afternoon, everyone. Now, the information about the events that happened yesterday in the anti-terror operation zone. The Lugansk sector. Yesterday, the intensity of shellings delivered by Russian occupation forces decreased. At the same time, the enemy delivered disturbing fire with the use of small arms and mortars along the contact line. At night, the militants carried out one armed provocation in Malinovo, one in Lobacho, and one in Zhovt. And during the second part of the day, the enemy delivered mortar shellings at the positions of Ukrainian forces in the region of Trukhispinka, Kryakivka, Novatoshkivka, Katerinivka, and Oleksandrivka. In the majority of cases, the enemy launched up to 10 mines. On the whole, during the last 24 hours in the Lugansk sector, there were 18 shellings delivered by the enemy, including 8 with the use of mortars. Yesterday in the Donetsk sector, the epicenter of military actions was Kamienka, Avdiivka, part of front line, and Shakhta-Butovka. There, between 6 and 11 p.m., the enemy delivered number of shellings of mid-intensity, launching at our positions more than 110 shells and mines. It is worth noting that in Kamienka, militants opened fire twice with the use of tanks, and Ukrainian forces returned fire in case of intensification of shelling delivered by the enemy. And in the course of enemy shelling that it delivered in the evening in Avdiivka, one house was damaged, and one armed provocation with the use of mortars was in Lugansk. In the region of the Donetsk airport, the militants used small arms, and in Zaitsevo they used weaponry of APCs. On the whole, yesterday in the Donetsk sector, there were 12 shellings delivered by the enemy, including 7 with the use of heavy weapons. The Mariupol sector. Yesterday, Russian occupation forces carried out artillery shelling of our rear positions. At 1:40 a.m., the occupants opened fire with the use of 152mm artillery to Gravska, that is at about 14 kilometers away from the line of contact. And in 2 hours, the militants launched 60 shells at our positions. And after 3 a.m., the occupants used barrel artillery in a neighboring Olgince, that is 6 kilometers away from the line of contact. And this led to the damage of residential houses. In Olginka village, all 12 houses in the central street were damaged. So windows were broken, also walls and roofs were damaged. And in Gravska village, enemy artillery shell blew up near hostel of local college. And in Chermalik, Shirokina, part of front line, the enemy used small arms both during the day and at night. And also here there was one armored provocation with the use of mortars in Chermalik and one in the region of Pavlopil. Yesterday at about 10 p.m., Russian occupation forces delivered fire at residential quarters of Marienka using grenade launchers and weaponry of APCs. And fire broke out in one of the houses. Fortunately, no casualties among civilians. Yesterday, on the whole, in the Mariupol sector, there were 27 shellings delivered by Russian occupation forces, including 6 with the use of heavy weapons. During the last 24 hours, in the result of the military actions, 1 Ukrainian serviceman was killed and 5 were wounded or traumatized. And our hearts go out to the relatives of the servicemen who died. These days, Chernivtsi court sentenced a militant of DPR to 11 years in prison. Law enforcement officers identified that the resident of Makiivka joined the militants in August 2014 and took part in military actions until 2017, and he was detained in the course of battle clash by ATO forces. In the course of investigation, the detained said that citizens of Russia participate actively in military actions, and before coming to Ukraine, these people were trained in special camps in the territory of the Russian Federation. In military firing ground in Mykolaievshchina, they had the final stage of battalion tactical training with live fire exercises of detached battalion tactical group of 81st Detachment Detached Aeromobile Brigade of Paratroopers. This was held in close cooperation with aviation and supported by Army Aviation of Land Forces, Armed Forces of Ukraine, and they had this strike on imaginary enemy, and then they were the paratroopers were supported by detachments, and then they rehearsed raid in the rear of the imaginary enemy, and then they were parachuted, both men and military freight and also heavy infantry equipment. Thank you. No questions.